It was 2 a.m. when President Ibrahim Traoré's secure phone pierced the darkness of his bedroom. Only 5 people in Burkina Faso's military had access to this encrypted line. The caller's voice was tense but controlled. "Sir, this is Major Sankara. Operation Spear has begun. General Doumbié is moving toward the palace with the 3rd Battalion." Traoré rose from his bed, immediately alert. Through his window, he could see the distant glow of headlights-armored vehicles advancing along the main avenue, their lights deliberately dimmed for stealth. "How far?" he asked, his mind already calculating options. 15 minutes from the outer perimeter, sir. The Presidential Guard has been alerted, but..." Major Sankara hesitated. "But Doumbié likely has loyalists among them." Traoré finished the thought. "Yes, sir. And the other battalions?" "Silent. No response to communications." The implication was clear. Either they were part of the coup or had been neutralized. General Maurice Doumbié, his most trusted military commander, his friend since their days at the military academy, the man he had personally elevated to Chief of Defense Staff, was attempting to overthrow him. But what General Doumbié didn't know was that President Traoré had been expecting this betrayal for exactly 3 days. Before we continue, we got something special for our loyal audience, so make sure to stick till the end. 3 days earlier, Colonel Ouédraogo, Traoré's intelligence chief, had placed a classified dossier on his desk with obvious reluctance. "Sir, we've intercepted communications you need to see." Inside were transcripts of calls between General Doumbié and known operatives of the French Foreign Intelligence Service discussing regime change and post-transition economic arrangements. "How reliable is this intelligence?" Traoré had asked. Colonel Ouédraogo's response was grim. "Multiple sources confirmed, sir. The French are offering him the presidency with their full backing. In exchange, he's agreed to reverse your policies on foreign military bases and mining concessions." The colonel had paused before adding, "They move in 3 days." Now, as those 3 days had passed, Traoré faced a decision that would determine not just his survival, but the future of Burkina Faso's independence. "Implement Protocol Omega," Traoré ordered, referring to a contingency plan developed precisely for this scenario, but known only to his innermost circle. "I'll meet you at the designated point in 10 minutes. As Traoré dressed quickly in civilian clothes, his mind flashed to the choice he had made 3 days ago. Rather than immediately arresting Doumbié on charges of treason, he had chosen to wait to watch, to allow the betrayal to unfold just enough to reveal everyone involved. It had been a calculated risk that now placed him in physical danger as armored vehicles approached his residence. Moving swiftly through a concealed passage connecting the presidential living quarters to a service area, Traoré emerged into the quiet night. A nondescript sedan with tinted windows waited, engine running. Major Sankara sat behind the wheel, visibly relieved as Traoré slipped into the passenger seat. Without a word, they pulled away, taking a route that deliberately avoided the advancing military convoy. "Status update," Traoré demanded as they navigated the darkened streets of Ouagadougou. "General Doumbié is personally leading the operation," Major Sankara reported. "He's mobilized approximately 200 soldiers, primarily from the 3rd Battalion. They've secured the national radio station and are positioning units around key government buildings." "And our countermeasures?" "In progress, sir. Colonel Ouédraogo has activated the sleeper network. Phase 1 is complete." Traoré nodded, satisfaction briefly flashing across his face. Phase 1 of the discreet replacement of key ammunition supplies in the 3rd Battalion's armory with blanks and disabled roundshad been implemented 48 hours earlier. The advancing troops would have just enough live ammunition to make their coup attempt credible, but not enough to sustain any significant conflict. The sedan pulled into an underground garage beneath an unremarkable office building on the outskirts of the city. This was the Shadow Command Centera fully equipped operational headquarters, unknown to all but the most trusted members of Traoré's security apparatus. As Traoré entered, he was greeted by a room full of activity: intelligence officers monitoring communications, security personnel coordinating movements, and most importantly, the loyal commanders of the 1st and 4th Battalions who had been secretly briefed the previous day. "Mr. President," acknowledged Colonel Ouédraogo, stepping forward with a tablet displaying a real-time map of the city. Illuminated dots showed troop movements. "General Doumbié has just entered the palace grounds. He'll discover your absence momentarily." Traoré took the tablet, studying the tactical situation. "And our French friends? Have they shown their hand yet?" Ouedraogo's expression hardened. "Yes, sir. We've detected unusual activity at their embassy. Multiple secure communications and a private jet that landed at the military airfield 1 hour ago." "Right on schedule," murmured Traoré. He turned to address the assembled officers. "Gentlemen, what is happening tonight is not merely a military coup. It is an attempt by foreign interests to reassert control over our nation's resources and destiny. General Doumbié is not acting alone. He is acting as an agent for those who have never accepted our independence." The room was silent, faces grim with determination. "We will not only defeat this coup," Traoré continued, "we will expose its architects for all our people to see." At the presidential palace, General Maurice Doumbié strode confidently through the main entrance, flanked by heavily armed soldiers. The presidential guard had offered minimal resistance, had joined his forces. Others had simply melted away, forewarned by whispers of what was coming. "Secure the second floor," he commanded a lieutenant. "Find Traoré and bring him to me alive." The coup needed legitimacy. A public resignation from Traoré, ideally broadcast live, would smooth the transition. His radio crackled. "General, the president is not in the residence. No sign of him anywhere in the compound." Doumbié frowned. This was unexpected but not catastrophic. "Expand the search perimeter and prepare the broadcast equipment. We move forward regardless." He sat at Traoré's desk, opening his laptop to review the statement he would soon deliver to the nation, announcing the necessary intervention of the armed forces to restore constitutional order. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, residents awoke to an unusual silence. Checkpoints, manned by soldiers from the 3rd Battalion, had been established at major intersections, and military vehicles were parked outside key buildings. At 6 a.m., regular programming was interrupted. "This is a message from the National Committee for Salvation. The military has assumed temporary control to address the unconstitutional actions of the former government. Citizens are advised to remain calm and stay in their homes." In the Shadow Command Center, Traoré and his loyal officers listened to the broadcast. "They're moving faster than expected," noted Colonel Ouedraogo. "Doumbié must be feeling pressure from his French backers." Traoré checked his watch. "Is the evidence package ready?" Ouedraogo nodded, handing him a flash drive. "Everything is here. The intercepted communications, bank transfers to offshore accounts, the complete timeline of meetings between Doumbié and French intelligence operatives." "Distribute as planned," ordered Traoré. "Every news outlet, social media platform, community leader. Our people need to see who is really behind this coup attempt." He turned to the commanders of the 1st and 4th Battalions. "Colonel Zongo, Colonel Kabori, are your units in position?" Both officers confirmed with sharp nod. "Remember," Traoré emphasized, "minimal force. We want arrests, not martyrs." Across the city, an extraordinary counter-operation was unfolding. Unlike traditional responses to military coups, which typically involved either capitulation or direct confrontation, Traoré's strategy was more sophisticated. As 3rd Battalion soldiers manned their checkpoints, they were unaware that their communications had been compromised, their ammunition strategically depleted, and most crucially, their flanks exposed to loyal units that had quietly surrounded them. Simultaneously, citizens began receiving messages on their phones, documents, and audio recordings, revealing General Doumbié's secret meetings with French officials, detailed plans for reinstating foreign control over Burkina Faso's gold mines, and perhaps most damaging, bank statements showing millions of euros transferred to accounts in Doumbié's name. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. At the French embassy, Ambassador Jean-Marc Lefort was growing increasingly concerned. The coup was proceeding, but Traoré remained at large, and most troublingly, there had been no statement of support from the other military battalions as promised by Doumbié. "Get me General Doumbié immediately," he instructed his aide. "And contact Paris. We may need to adjust our approach." Outside the embassy windows, he could see small groups of citizens gathering, some holding phones, displaying documents that made his blood run cold. Back at the presidential palace, General Doumbié was facing a cascading crisis. His attempts to contact the French embassy went unanswered. Reports were coming in of soldiers from the 1st and 4th Battalions taking up positions throughout the city. Most alarmingly, his own troops were reporting ammunition shortages and equipment failures. "Sir, a major reported urgently. We're receiving reports that compromising documents are circulating online communications between you and French officials." Doumbié felt the first real stirrings of panic. How had Traoré known? How had he prepared so thoroughly? Before he could formulate a response, the palace security system unexpectedly reactivated, screens showing multiple military vehicles approaching. Not foreign forces coming to his aid, but loyal Burkinabe units moving with clear purpose and coordination. The trap was closing, and General Doumbié was about to discover that he had underestimated not just his former friend's intelligence network, but his willingness to turn betrayal into the ultimate lesson in loyalty. What happened next would shock not just Burkina Faso, but the entire world, watching as a master of political strategy transformed an attempted coup into a public demonstration of why true independence could never be bought or sold. At the Shadow Command Center, Traoré received the news he had been waiting for. "The 3rd Battalion is standing down, sir. Unit commanders are surrendering their positions without resistance." Colonel Ouedraogo couldn't keep a note of admiration from his voice. "Your strategy worked perfectly. By exposing Doumbié's foreign connections before the coup could solidify, you've turned his own soldiers against him." Traoré nodded, but his expression remained solemn. "And Doumbié himself?" "Still in the palace, sir, surrounded with his personal guard. He's requesting terms." Traoré considered this information carefully. How he handled Doumbié now would set the tone for everything that followed. A public execution would satisfy calls for justice, but might create a martyr. Simply imprisoning him would leave questions unanswered. "I want him brought to the National Stadium," Traoré decided finally. "Full security, but no humiliation. Prepare for a public questioning televised live. No scripted trial, no predetermined outcome. Just Doumbié, myself, the evidence, and the eyes of our people." The officers exchanged glances, recognizing the boldness of the approach. Public, transparent, a direct appeal to the citizens' judgment rather than state authority. By noon, the coup attempt had effectively collapsed. The 3rd Battalion had surrendered en masse, many soldiers actually joining the forces loyal to Traoré once they understood the nature of Doumbié's betrayal. The French embassy was surrounded by a growing crowd of protesters holding printouts of the leaked documents and demanding explanations. Ambassador Lefort had retreated to his secure communications room, desperately trying to contact Paris for instructions on handling this unprecedented diplomatic disaster. At the presidential palace, General Doumbié sat alone in the office he had briefly claimed, watching through the windows as vehicles from the 1st Battalion approached. His personal guards had melted away, loyalty evaporating in the face of exposed treachery. He had failed, but more significantly, he had been outmaneuvered by Traoré in a way he never anticipated. The president had somehow identified the plot, allowed it to proceed just far enough to expose all involved, and then collapsed it from within. As soldiers entered the office, Doumbié rose, surrendering his sidearm with as much dignity as he could muster. "General Maurice Doumbié, you are under arrest for treason against the Republic of Burkina Faso," announced Colonel Zongo formally. Doumbié did not resist as they escorted him out. His mind was elsewhere, already anticipating the public reckoning to come. 4 hours later, Ibrahim Traoré stood at the center of the National Stadium, which was filled to capacity with citizens who had flocked there upon hearing of the unprecedented event about to take place. A simple table had been set up with 2 chairs facing each other. Between them was a monitor visible to both the seated participants and the stadium's massive screens, which would display the evidence for all to see. Traoré had chosen to wear a simple military uniform without decorations or indicators of ranka. Deliberate statement that this confrontation was not about power or hierarchy, but about truth and accountability. When General Doumbié was escorted in, similarly dressed but visibly haggard from the day's events, a murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the triumphant scene of a vanquished enemy being paraded before cheering masses. Instead, there was a solemn atmosphere, as if the entire nation was serving as witness to a painful but necessary examination of betrayal. "General Doumbié," Traoré began, his voice amplified throughout the stadium but maintaining a conversational tone. "For 15 years we served together. We fought together. We built this transitional government together. Today, you led soldiers of the 3rd Battalion in an attempt to remove me from office." He paused, looking directly at his former friend. "I want to understand why. Not just for myself, but for our people, who deserve to know the truth. Was it ambition, ideology, or something else?" Doumbié, who had expected recrimination, even humiliation, seemed momentarily taken aback by the straightforward question. The stadium was absolutely silent, tens of thousands holding their breath. "The path you've chosen for our country is unsustainable," he finally responded, his voice firm but steady. "Your policies of resource nationalism, your rejection of Western military support against the insurgents, your pivot toward Russian and Chinese partnerships, they've isolated us from traditional allies who could actually help develop our nation." Traoré nodded, acknowledging the response without interrupting. When Doumbié finished, he asked simply, "And these concerns led you to coordinate with French intelligence to overthrow the government?" He gestured to the screen, which began displaying intercepted communication emails, transcripts of phone calls, photographs of clandestine meetings. "These are not fabrications, Maurice. These are your words, your meetings, your agreements." The evidence was devastating in its comprehensiveness. Doumbié discussing post-coup economic arrangements with French officials, negotiating the reinstatement of foreign mining concessions canceled by Traoré's government, even the specific deployments of the 3rd Battalion that had occurred that very morning. Most damning were bank records showing payments to offshore accounts controlled by Doumbié, totaling over 3 million euros. As the evidence accumulated on screen, Doumbié's composure began to crack. The justifications he had constructed in his mind that he was acting for the country's long-term benefit, that pragmatism required difficult choices, seemed hollow against the documented reality of personal enrichment and foreign direction. The crowd remained silent, but their judgment was palpable in the air. "I have one question that I believe our citizens deserve an answer to," Traoré said finally. "At what point did you decide that our nation's sovereignty was negotiable? That our resources belonged more rightfully to foreign interests than to our own people? That decisions about Burkina Faso's future should be made in Paris rather than Ouagadougou?" The question hung in the air, not accusatory, but genuinely seeking understanding of a fundamental betrayal. Doumbié looked up, meeting Traoré's gaze directly for the first time. "You make it sound simple," he said, a note of anger finally breaking through. "But governing isn't about idealistic stands. It's about survival. The West controls the international financial system, the security apparatus, development funding. Defy them, and they'll ensure you fail through sanctions, through terrorism they conveniently fail to help combat, through economic isolation. So you chose to surrender rather than struggle," Traoré observed quietly. "You decided the cost of true independence was too high." He stood, addressing not just Doumbié now, but the entire stadium, the entire nation. "This is the choice we face as a people. The easy path of continued dependence, where our resources enrich others while we receive just enough to prevent collapse? Or the harder path of true self-determination, where we endure challenges now to build genuine prosperity for future generations?" He turned back to Doumbié. "What you never understood, Maurice, is that this isn't my policy or my ideology. It is the expressed will of our citizens who have suffered enough under external control, masked as partnership." The crowd began to stir now, not with anger but with a building energy of affirmation. The people of Burkina Faso do not want their president to simply manage foreign interests. They want leadership that defends their birthright, the wealth beneath their soil, the right to determine their own alliances, the dignity of true independence. As applause began to build throughout the stadium, Doumbié sat in silence, the full weight of his betrayal finally clear not just to the nation, but to himself. "General Doumbié," Traoré said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you will stand trial according to our laws. You will have full legal representation and every protection our Constitution guarantees. Because unlike those who sent you, we believe in justice, not revenge." He turned to address the crowd one final time. "Today, we have seen what happens when we choose transparency over secrecy, justice over vengeance, and unity over division. This is how a free nation conducts its not through backroom deals with foreign powers, but through the will of its people, expressed openly and honestly." The stadium erupted in sustained applause as Traoré walked toward the exit, leaving Doumbié to contemplate the ruins of his ambition and the resilience of the democracy he had tried to destroy. In the days that followed, the international repercussions were significant. The French government, faced with irrefutable evidence of its intelligence services' involvement in a coup attempt, issued a carefully worded statement expressing regret for unauthorized activities by certain elements within our diplomatic mission. More significantly, other West African nations took note. Leaders in Mali, Niger, and Chad began reviewing their own security arrangements, particularly the presence of foreign military advisors with unusual access to command structures. 1 month after the failed coup, Traoré addressed cadets at the military academy. "True loyalty is not to individuals, not to me as president, not to any general or official. True loyalty is to the people of Burkina Faso and their right to determine their own destiny. The greatest threat to our independence isn't external. It's the temptation to believe that we cannot stand on our own, that we must surrender our sovereignty piece by piece for protection or development. Today, I ask you to reject that lie." The failed coup had become something more powerful than its architects ever imagined. Not the end of Burkina Faso's independence, but the beginning of a new chapter in African self-determination, written not in the shadows of foreign capitals, but in the bright light of democratic accountability. And General Doumbié, who had sought to become president through betrayal, had instead become the instrument of his nation's greatest demonstration of sovereignty. The hunter had become the hunted, and the lesson would echo across the continent for generations to come. And for our loyal watchers who stick around to the very end, you guys are legends. Make sure to like and subscribe, but most importantly, drop a heart in the comments so we know you're part of the family. See you in the next one.